Growing up, I always knew my brother Alex was the favorite. It wasn't subtle, my parents made it pretty obvious. If we both wanted toys, Alex got the brand new action figure while I got some knockoff. If we fought, and trust me, we fought a lot, I was always the one who got punished, even if he started it. My mom had this thing she'd say when I complained about it. "You're the responsible one. You don't need as much attention." Responsible? I was 10. It wasn't responsibility, it was neglect. Things only got worse as we grew up. When Alex barely passed his classes, my parents threw a little party for him and told him how proud they were. When I aced every single subject, all I got was, "Good job. We knew you could do it." No party.
No celebration.
Just nothing. Then came our birthdays. On Alex's 18th, my parents handed him the keys to a shiny new car. Nothing too extravagant, but it was worth at least $15,000. I, on the other hand, got a beat-up old sedan with peeling paint and a dying engine on mine. My dad even joked, "Well, at least you're the one who knows how to save money for a better car, right?" Like I had a choice. The favoritism didn't just stop at material things. Alex could do no wrong in their eyes, even when he was clearly a disaster. Once, when we were teenagers, he threw a party at our house while our parents were out of town. Things got out of hand, and someone stole my dad's watch collection. Guess who got blamed? Me. Alex cried crocodile tears about how he'd never do something like that. And suddenly I was grounded for 2 months. 2 months. Meanwhile, Alex got nothing, no punishment, not even a stern talking to. Still, I tried to move past it. I told myself it didn't matter. I'd make my own way in life and wouldn't rely on anyone else. That mindset carried me through college. I worked 2 jobs, took out loans, and finally got my degree. Meanwhile, Alex dropped out after 1 semester and moved back in with our parents. By the time I finished college, I felt like I was finally getting my life on track. I'd worked my ass off to get a degree, balancing part-time jobs and schoolwork while living on ramen noodles and secondhand furniture. But it all paid off. I landed a decent job in tech, moved into my first apartment, and even started dating Sarah, who would later become my wife. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was doing something right. Alex, on the other hand, was still the same disaster he'd always been. He'd dropped out of college after 1 semester, burned through a string of dead-end jobs, and still lived at home with our parents. He spent most of his time partying or coming up with excuses for why nothing was ever his fault. The economy sucks. My boss was a jerk. Nobody understands me. You get the picture. At first, I tried not to let it bother me. We were on different paths, and I wasn't about to rub my success in his face. But Alex had a way of making his problems my problems. It started small. He'd show up at my apartment unannounced, usually after a fight with our parents, and crash on my couch for days. He'd eat all my food, leave a mess everywhere, and then act like I was unreasonable if I asked him to leave. "Come on, man," he'd say. "You're doing fine. What's the big deal?" Then there were the loans. Alex had a knack for coming up with sob stories about why he needed money. A car repair here, rent there, it was always something urgent. The first time he asked, I gave him $500. I figured he's my brother and family helps family, right? But then he came back a month later asking for more. And then more after that. By the time Sarah and I got engaged, I'd lent him over $3,000, none of which he ever paid back. When I finally said no, he acted like I'd betrayed him. "You're my brother," he snapped. "What's a few $1,000 to someone like you?" I should have cut him off completely right then and there, but I didn't. Part of me still felt guilty. After all, I'd had to fight for everything I had. But Alex had been coddled his whole life. It wasn't entirely his fault that he'd turned out the way he did. So I kept the door open just a crack. Things came to a head at my wedding. Sarah and I had planned a small, intimate ceremony with our closest friends and family. It was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. Instead, Alex turned it into a circus. He showed up late, already half drunk, and immediately started causing problems. During the ceremony, he made loud comments about how I was punching above my weight by marrying Sarah. At the reception, he got into an argument with one of Sarah's bridesmaids and spilled red wine all over her dress. When I confronted him, he acted like he was the victim. "Sorry for having a good time," he slurred. The final straw came during his speech. I didn't even ask him to give one, he just grabbed the mic and started rambling. He spent half the time talking about himself and the other half making backhanded comments about me. "I guess miracles do happen," he said, raising his glass, "because I honestly never thought my brother would find someone willing to put up with him. I wanted to kick him out right then and there, but my mom begged me not to." "He's just emotional," she said. "You know how much he looks up to you." "Emotional? Sure, let's call it that." After the wedding, Sarah and I agreed to keep our distance from Alex. I'd spent enough of my life cleaning up his messes, and I wasn't about to let him ruin our marriage. But, of course, Alex wasn't done with me yet. A few months later, Sarah and I found out she was pregnant. It was the best news we could have hoped for. We started making plans, budgeting for baby supplies, and even picking out names. Everything felt perfect until Alex called. This time, it wasn't a small favor. He needed $5,000. Apparently, he'd gotten into some kind of legal trouble. Unpaid debts, a repossessed car, the usual, and he was desperate. When I told him I couldn't help him, he exploded. "You're my brother," he yelled. "What the hell is the point of all your money if you can't even help your own family?" I lost it. For years, I'd let him guilt-trip me, manipulate me, and take advantage of me. But this time was different. I had a child on the way now, a family of my own to think about. I told Alex, in no uncertain terms, that I was done. No more loans, no more handouts, no more bailing him out. He was on his own. He didn't take it well. He called me every name in the book, accused me of being selfish, and even tried to drag our parents into it. But, to my surprise, they actually backed me up. I guess they were finally starting to see Alex for who he really was. They told him they weren't going to help him anymore, either. And that's when Alex decided to retaliate. When I told Alex I wasn't going to help him anymore, I knew he wouldn't take it well, but I didn't realize just how far he'd go. For weeks, he bombarded me with calls and texts, switching between guilt trips and outright insults. One minute, it was, "You're my only brother, and you're abandoning me." The next, it was, "You think you're better than me just because you got lucky with your life." I ignored him. I had to. Sarah was in her first trimester, and the stress wasn't good for her or the baby. We had enough on our plate without Alex adding to it. But ignoring Alex didn't make him go away. In fact, it made him even more determined to cause trouble. Started small. He spread rumors about me to mutual friends, claiming I'd turned my back on family and didn't care about anyone but myself. Most people saw through his nonsense, but a few reached out to me, asking if I was okay. I had to explain, over and over again, that Alex wasn't some poor, misunderstood victim. He was a grown man who refused to take responsibility for his actions. Then, Alex took things a step further. One day, I got a call from my landlord saying someone had filed a noise complaint against me. I was confused because, first of all, Sarah and I lived in a quiet neighborhood, and second, we weren't exactly the partying type. But when I asked for more details, the landlord admitted the complaint came from an anonymous email that sounded suspiciously like Alex. I confronted him about it, but of course, he denied everything. "Why would I waste my time on something like that?" he said, feigning innocence. But I knew him too well. This was exactly the kind of petty stunt he'd pull when he didn't get his way. Things escalated from there. One morning, I went out to my car to find that someone had keyed it from bumper to bumper. At first, I thought it might have been a random act of vandalism, but then I remembered the way Alex had screamed at me the last time we talked. "You'll regret this," he'd said. I couldn't prove it was him, but in my gut, I knew. Sarah was furious. "This has to stop," she said. "He's not just a toxic influence, he's dangerous. What if he does something worse?" She was right, of course. But what was I supposed to do? Go to the police? Tell them I suspected my own brother of harassing me? Even if they believed me, I didn't want to drag our family name through the mud. I decided to let it go, hoping Alex would eventually get bored and move on. But Alex didn't move on. A few weeks later, I got a call from my mom. She sounded upset, which wasn't unusual when it came to Alex. "You need to talk to your brother," she said. "He's in a really bad place. Apparently, Alex had gotten evicted from his apartment. He'd fallen behind on rent, and when his landlord finally kicked him out, Alex showed up at my parents' house with all his stuff. My dad let him crash in the guest room, but it didn't take long for the old patterns to resurface. Alex drank all their beer, maxed out their Wi-Fi streaming movies all day, and argued with my dad over every little thing. I wasn't surprised. I'd seen this movie before, and I knew how it would end. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, my parents called me again, this time to tell me they'd had enough. My dad gave Alex an ultimatum. Get a job and start contributing, or find somewhere else to live. Alex, being Alex, chose the latter. And guess where he decided to go? One night, I was sitting on the couch with Sarah when there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Alex standing there with 2 suitcases and a duffel bag. "Hey bro," he said, like nothing had happened. "Mind if I crash here for a bit?" I couldn't believe the audacity. After everything he'd done, after all the chaos he'd caused, he really thought I'd just welcome him in with open arms? I told him no. Not just no, but hell no. "You need to figure your life out, Alex," I said. "I've got a pregnant wife and a baby on the way. I don't have time for your drama." He didn't take it well. He accused me of being selfish, heartless, and every other insult he could think of. When I didn't budge, he stormed off, muttering under his breath about how I'd pay for this. That was the last straw. I called my parents and told them everything, about the noise complaint, the car, and the way Alex had shown up uninvited. To my surprise, they didn't defend him this time. In fact, they sounded just as fed up as I was. "We've been talking about this," my dad said, "and we've made a decision." What he told me next left me speechless. My parents had been updating their will, and after much deliberation, they decided to cut Alex out entirely. Instead, they were leaving their entire estate to me. "Maybe this will be the wake-up call he needs," my dad said. To be honest, I didn't know how to feel about it. On the one hand, I understood why they made that decision. Alex had done nothing but take advantage of their generosity for years. But on the other hand, I knew how much it would devastate him. The estate wasn't massive, but it wasn't nothing either. Between the house, the business, and their savings, it added up to about $2 million. That kind of money could have turned Alex's life around, if he'd been willing to put in the work. When Alex found out, he was furious. He called me, screaming about how I'd stolen his inheritance. "You manipulated them," he yelled. "You turned them against me." I tried to reason with him, but it was pointless. In Alex's mind, he was the victim and I was the villain. But here's the thing. I wasn't the one who ruined Alex's chances. He did that all on his own. When my parents decided to cut Alex out of their will and leave everything to me, I knew it was going to get messy. But I wasn't prepared for just how far Alex would go to make my life miserable. At first, it was the usual tantrums. Alex called me every name in the book. Selfish, greedy, manipulative. He said I had brainwashed our parents, convinced them to turn their backs on him, and stolen what was rightfully his. I ignored most of it. After years of his antics, I developed a thick skin. But then he started dragging our parents into it. Alex showed up at their house unannounced, demanding that they change their minds. My dad told me later that Alex had spent hours yelling, crying, and begging, all in the same breath. "I'm your son," he said. "How can you do this to me?" My mom, who'd always had a soft spot for him, almost caved. But my dad stood firm. "Alex, this isn't about punishment," my dad said. "This is about consequences. You've had every opportunity to turn your life around, and you've wasted them all. We're not going to keep enabling you." That didn't go over well. Alex stormed out, swearing he'd never speak to them again. But of course that wasn't true. A few weeks later, Sarah and I were settling into the rhythm of preparing for the baby. We just finished setting up the nursery when I got a frantic call from my mom. "Alex is threatening to sue us," she said. I almost dropped the phone. What? Apparently, Alex had convinced himself that he had a legal right to a share of the inheritance, even though my parents were still alive and their will hadn't even gone into effect yet. He claimed they were being unfair and that he was entitled to what was his. The irony was almost laughable. Alex had spent his entire adult life leeching off my parents, And now he had the audacity to act like they owed him something? But as ridiculous as it sounded, he was serious. He'd even gone so far as to consult a lawyer. My dad wasn't having it. He called Alex's bluff and told him to go ahead and file a lawsuit. "You think a judge is going to side with you over your own parents?" he said. "Good luck with that." But Alex didn't back down. Instead, he doubled down on his campaign to paint himself as the victim. He started posting long rants on social media about how he'd been betrayed by his own family. He claimed I was a gold digger who'd manipulated my way into their good graces and stolen his inheritance. The posts didn't get much traction at first. Most people who knew Alex had long since grown tired of his drama. But then he found a new angle. He started reaching out to extended family members, spinning the story in a way that made him look like the underdog. "It's not about the money," he told them. "It's about principle. How could they choose one son over the other?" Some of our relatives bought into his narrative. They started calling my parents, asking them to reconsider. A few even called me, accusing me of being greedy. "You've always been the responsible one," one aunt said. "Why can't you just share?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Share? Alex had spent his entire life freeloading, and now I was supposed to hand over my future to bail him out again? I told her, as politely as I could, that this wasn't about greed. It was about setting boundaries. Meanwhile, Sarah was nearing her third trimester, and the stress of Alex's nonsense was starting to take a toll on both of us. We tried to stay focused on the baby, but every time we thought we'd put the drama behind us, Alex found a new way to stir the pot. One day, I came home from work to find Sarah sitting on the couch, looking shaken. She handed me her phone, and my heart sank when I saw the messages. Alex had sent her a series of angry texts, accusing her of turning me against him. He called her a gold digger, said she was stealing me away from my family, and even made some veiled threats about how she'd regret it if she didn't fix this. That was it. I was done playing nice. I called Alex and told him, in no uncertain terms, to leave Sarah out of it. "If you ever contact her again," I said, "I'll file a restraining order. Do you understand me?" He tried to play it off like it was a joke. "Relax, man," he said. "I was just blowing off steam." But I wasn't laughing. "This isn't a joke, Alex. Stay away." After that, things went quiet for a while. Alex stopped calling, stopped texting, and even stopped posting on social media. For a moment, I thought maybe he'd finally gotten the message. But then, out of nowhere, I got a call from a lawyer. Alex had filed a formal complaint against me and my parents, accusing us of emotional abuse and financial manipulation. He claimed we'd conspired to cut him out of the inheritance as a way of punishing him, and he demanded a settlement of $500,000. It was absurd, of course. He had no evidence, no case, and no chance of winning. But that didn't stop him from dragging us through the mud. The legal fees alone were enough to give my parents second thoughts about whether cutting him off had been worth it. "I don't know if we can keep doing this," my mom said one night. "He's our son, no matter what." But my dad refused to budge. "If we give in now, it'll never stop," he said. "He has to learn." I wasn't sure if Alex could learn. He'd spent his entire life blaming everyone else for his problems. Why would he change now? The lawsuit ended as quickly as it began. The judge threw it out, calling it frivolous and without merit. Alex didn't even bother showing up for the final hearing. But the damage was done. My relationship with him, what little was left of it, was completely destroyed. My parents were heartbroken, Sarah was exhausted, and I was left wondering if things would ever go back to normal. And then, just when I thought it was over, Alex came crawling back. After the lawsuit was thrown out, I thought maybe, just maybe, that was the end of Alex's antics. He'd hit rock bottom. Surely, he'd realized that there was nothing left to gain by lashing out at everyone around him. But, as always with Alex, I was wrong. It started about a month after the court case. By then, Sarah was in her final weeks of pregnancy, and all I wanted was peace. No more phone calls, no more texts, no more drama. But then Alex reached out again, and this time he wasn't angry, he was desperate. "Hey man," he said over the phone, his voice shaky. Can we talk? I almost hung up right then and there, but something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was that small, stupid part of me that still wanted to believe he could change. What do you want, Alex? I asked, my tone colder than I intended. He launched into a long, rambling explanation about how hard things had been for him lately. He'd lost his job, again, and was crashing on a friend's couch, but the friend was kicking him out soon. He had no money, no place to go, and no one else to turn to. I need your help, he said. Just this one time. Please. I almost laughed. One time? Alex, I've been helping you your whole life. What makes this time any different? I mean it this time, he said. I'm going to get my act together. I just need a little help to get back on my feet. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him. But I'd heard it all before. The promises, the apologies, the endless excuses. And every time he'd found a way to screw me over. I'm sorry, I said. And for once I meant it. But I can't do this anymore. I have a family to think about now. I can't keep bailing you out. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, in a voice so low I almost didn't hear it, he said, They left you $2 million, didn't they? You're really going to let me suffer when you have that kind of money? My stomach tightened. Of course, he'd bring up the inheritance. That money isn't yours, Alex, I said. It was never yours. And even if it was, you would have wasted it like you've wasted everything else. That set him off. He started screaming about how unfair it was, how I'd stolen what should have been his, how I was a terrible brother who didn't care about family. I let him rant for a minute before cutting him off. You know what, Alex? You're right. I don't care anymore. You've burned every bridge with me, with Mom and Dad, with everyone. And the sad part is, it's nobody's fault but your own. Before he could respond, I hung up. That should have been the end of it. But, as always, Alex had one last card to play. 2 days later, Sarah and I came home from a doctor's appointment to find our house had been broken into. The door was kicked in, and the living room was a mess. Drawers pulled open, furniture overturned, even the nursery ransacked. My heart sank. I knew, in that moment, that this wasn't random. This was Alex. The police came and took a report, but without proof, there wasn't much they could do. Nothing of real value was taken. Just some cash from Sarah's purse and a few other small items, but the damage was done. This wasn't about money. It was about sending a message. For the first time in my life, I felt real fear. Not just for myself, but for Sarah and our unborn child. What if Alex came back? What if he decided to take things even further? I called my parents that night and told them everything. My dad was furious, but my mom just sounded defeated. I don't know what's wrong with him, she said. He wasn't always like this. Yes, he was, I snapped. You just didn't want to see it. It was a harsh thing to say, but it was the truth. Alex had spent his entire life being coddled, excused, and forgiven for things he should have been held accountable for. And now we were all paying the price. The break-in was the final straw. I filed a restraining order against Alex the next morning. He wasn't allowed within 500 feet of me, Sarah, or our home. If he violated it, he'd go to jail. First, I felt guilty. Despite everything he'd done, he was still my brother. But then I looked at Sarah, sitting on the couch with her hand on her belly, and I knew I'd made the right decision. My priority was my family now, not Alex. The restraining order worked. Alex disappeared from our lives completely. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits. It was like he'd fallen off the face of the earth. And for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. A few months later, our daughter was born. Holding her for the first time, I realized just how much I'd been holding on to the wrong things. I'd spent so many years trying to fix Alex, trying to save him, when all along he didn't want to be saved. Letting go of him wasn't selfish, it was necessary. I haven't spoken to Alex since. Last I heard, he moved to another state and was living with some new friends. My parents still send him the occasional text, but even they've mostly cut ties. As for me, I'm done. Done feeling guilty. Done letting him control my life. Done being the brother who always cleans up his messes. Because at the end of the day, family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who love you, support you, and make your life better. Not the ones who tear it apart. And for the first time in a long time, I finally feel free.